The words of the Gospel of John, which is preserved by the church and handed down to us through the centuries, for our hearing, our understanding, and our discussion this morning. 3 days later, there was a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples were guests also. When they started running low on wine at the wedding banquet, Jesus' mother told him, "They're just about out of wine." Jesus said, "Is that any of our business? Mother, yours or mine? This isn't my time, don't push me." She went ahead anyway, telling the servants, "Whatever he tells you, do it." 6 stoneware water pots were there, used by the Jews for ritual washings. Each held 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus ordered the servants to fill the pots with water, and they filled them to the brim. "Now fill your pitchers and take them to the host," Jesus said, and they did. When the host tasted the water that had become wine, he didn't know what had just happened, but the servants, of course, knew. He called out to the bridegroom, "Everybody I know begins with their finest wines, and after the guests have had their fill, brings in the cheap stuff. But you've saved the best till now." This act in Cana of Galilee was the first sign Jesus gave, the first glimpse of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise Christ, Lord.
After that first reading this morning, you can probably see why the church didn't let people read certain books of the Bible. It's very, very sensual. And in some other translations, quite graphic. This is the translation that Eugene Peterson uses, and actually, I think it's one of the best translations I've seen of that particular text. This is also the text that is often used when couples get married, from the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, depending on what your tradition is. And it talks about how it's a metaphor for the love that God has for God's people. It sees it as, in this case, in the Solomonic way, as a love between a couple that have just gotten married. And it's not unusual, as you see in the other readings, that the whole idea of God's relationship with us, especially God's relationship with the church, in a future sense, is styled after the whole idea of a heavenly banquet. And I think it's very interesting to see what happens in the story of Cana. There's so much to talk about if one really wanted to study this particular text. Cana, just the word itself, evokes something in people's minds, especially it evokes something particularly for the people who first heard the story. What does Cana sound like to you? Canaan, yes, it sounds like Canaan. And interesting enough, they're nowhere near each other. As far as we know, the Cana that's talked about in this particular story is very, very close to where Jesus was ministering. But Canaan itself, which is the land of milk and honey, the place where the Israelites were promised, is a very, very wide space. And the area that was actually called Canaan is sort of up here, and Canaan is sort of down here. So although Canaan was a part of Canaan, Canaan was not part of Canaan, to get my drift. And so it's very, very, there's a great distance there, but just hearing it in the story, people are automatically thinking, Canaan. Did he say Cana or did he say Canaan? And they're talking to each other in the synagogue saying, did you hear what he said? Was it Cana or Canaan? Well, the whole idea was that they were supposed to evoke something immediately. And Canaan was the promised land of milk and honey. So when you heard Cana or Canaan, either one, you got the idea that this story was going to be about a meal or about the promise. But somehow told through the story of eating. And you'll notice how Mary is referred to here in the story. How is she referred to? The mother of Jesus, never named. Why does a writer do that? Other than that he can, or she can. Why would you not name somebody, just say the mother of Jesus? What is that supposed to mean? Do you ever, I don't know if you ever experienced this in your lifetime, but we're at the dinner table and my father's there talking about something, and I'm talking about my mother said, well, she said I couldn't do it. And my mother says, she? Who is she? My name is Mother. But I'm not she. And my name is Dorothy, but I'm not she, you know. So the whole idea of saying the mother of Jesus, that means something. It's to not name the person, what does that mean? It could be a put down. It could be a mysterious way of describing someone. That there's some special importance. That what they want you to know is not anything about Mary, whoever that was, but to know specifically about the relationship. This story is all about familial relationships, although it doesn't seem like it on the surface. Because it's trying to tell about the relationship between God and God's people. That's why we sang that opening hymn, Torah Ora. God has spoken to the people. And even the last hymn that we sang is also trying to tell that story, that there is a relationship. And you can see it through many metaphors. You can see it through family metaphors, or family systems, or you can see it through a meal, but there are other ways also. So they go to this wedding feast, and Jesus and his disciples, although it doesn't say it here, they show up late. Most Palestinian wedding feasts lasted for a month. And what happened was that the groom's family would celebrate first. And they would get together for a week or two and have a big party. And then they would all go en masse, if you will, and they go and they kidnap the bride. It's actually a kidnapping. She doesn't know when he's going to come. You might remember the story that happens in the Gospels where it says to the wise and foolish virgins who are waiting up for the bridegroom, they never know when he's going to come. Make sure your lamps are always lit. Remember that story? It happens often. That's because in the tradition, the Palestinian tradition, when you had the wedding, you never knew when the bridegroom was going to come. There was a whole month that you had to be absolutely ready. And it's the bridegroom's job to try to fool the bride, to not let her have any idea when she might become and taken. But it's a kidnapping in that nobody knows when it's going to take place, and it's supposed to be a surprise. So just when you think you don't know when it's going to happen, that's when the bridegroom's party came and took you away. And then they parade you through the streets with a great celebration, wake everybody up, and then they take you to the wedding place, and that meal goes on for a whole week. Jesus was late, about 3 weeks late, apparently. And he just gets, and of course, you have to lay aside a lot of wine and food for all that. And people just keep on bringing the food over and over again, and the wine's going to run out. And he runs out, they run out, there's not enough wine, and the mother of Jesus comes up and says, you need to do something. And he gives her a very flip remark that would have gotten my hand smacked, or part of me smacked, I'm sure. Don't push me. If I said that, in the 1960s, I would have been pushed a little bit, I think. And he's very flip with her. And some people have even interpreted mean to her. In fact, the translation from the King James Version is woman. Doesn't even call her mom. It says woman. What has that to do with me? It's not my time. Go away. Here it says, don't push me. But why do you think he says that? What does that mean? It's not my time. Don't push me. All she did is said, look, you're late. And you notice, Jesus shows up. He doesn't bring a gift. He comes to the wedding, and he brings no gift. You know how it is that when you go to a party, you're always supposed to bring something. And usually people bring some wine. Still happening 2,000 years later. The wine industry caught on to this very early. So usually you bring wine. But Jesus shows up, and he shows up not only within with himself. He shows up with his entire retinue of disciples. They show up late and they don't bring anything. Very rude behavior. There. So Mary is saying something about that. Oh, finally got here, I see. And you bring your married man and followers. Yeah, very good, probably. You know. So where's the stuff you're supposed to bring? I told you when you came, I gave you a grocery list of things to bring, and you show up with nothing. And he says, listen, woman, don't you push me? And she should have said, listen, son, I can still wash your mouth with soap. Instead, she says to the people, servants, that's how he always is. Just do whatever he says, okay? And there is this moment then where the water, and there's a lot of water, that's a lot of water, is turned into wine. But not just any wine, the best wine. In fact, you see what the steward says, or the host says, not knowing what has happened, saying, this is really, really great. You know, most people, they serve the best stuff first, wait till everybody gets drunk, and then after that, people won't notice the difference. If you've ever given a dinner party, you understand that very well, especially when it gets down to, did anybody ever see, remember That Girl, TV show That Girl, Marlo Thomas? You ever see the one where it was New Year's Eve and they thought nobody was coming to their party and then everyone shows up? Remember that one? Oh, it's very funny because they have a New Year's Eve party and they invite everybody, and everybody else is going to somebody else's party who lives in their building. And, you know, in her typical kind of whiny way, Marlo Thomas says, you know, this is not fair. And so Ted says, okay, well, honey, we'll just stay home and not worry about it. So apparently word got out that she was upset. So at like 5 after 12, everybody, they're just about, Don's just about to go home, or whatever his name was, Don was about to go home, Ted was the building. Don's about to go home, and all of a sudden, everybody starts showing up, and they have no food. They haven't prepared at all. So it shows that at 3 o'clock in the morning, putting peanut butter on cornflakes in order to try to deal with the crowds. And there's just no, you know, what I'm going to do. They're mixing honey together with water and a little bit of sugar and passing it off as some exotic drink. They had nothing. It's really quite funny. Well, it's sort of the way here. Here there was nothing left, and all of a sudden there is plenty. And that also is supposed to be a metaphor. In fact, it's said that this is the first miracle that Jesus does. And it is the first one in the Gospel of John. There's many other ones after that. The whole idea of changing water into wine is considered to be a miraculous thing. It seems more like magic, though. And Jesus, after this point, is accused by many people of just being a run-of-the-mill magician. Anybody can put some red food coloring in, add a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of grain, and make it look good, right? Anybody can do this. So the rest of the gospel is concerned, especially from chapter 6 on, where this is called the signs gospel as part of it, to try to show how it is that no matter what Jesus did, simple or grand, people just didn't get it. It says the disciples believed him right away. But in the next chapter it says, and then they started not to believe in him, and then he left. Because he couldn't keep up, no matter what he did, he could not keep up with what the people's expectations were. Because when people just say, all I want is a miracle, and then when they get there, they say, well, really, all I want is 2. And then when they have the 2, they say, well, since I've had 2, 3, you know, why not ask for more? Let's see how far we can go with this. And the point of the writer here, one of the points is, no matter how much we ask for, it doesn't ever seem to be enough. And we seem to be in this constant way of trying to test God to see whether God still loves us on a regular basis by our asking. That's what the whole phrase of lead us not into temptation means in the Lord's Prayer. It means God, actually the Aramaic says, God, don't make us ever so desperate that we test you to see whether or not you still love us. Those people who are parents know how children can test you to see whether or not you still love them. I can remember, well, they still love us. I can remember as a child being very, very angry, being sent upstairs for some sort of punishment. And and sending an airplane down with a paper to the bottom of the steps saying, I hate you. Hate you. You know, that's supposed to cut to a parent's heart, and it usually does. It was very effective once. Then I started writing entire books in front of in order to get attention. You know. Oh, it's another one of those books. Okay, put it in the file there. You know, come Christmas we'll have a bonfire, whatever. The whole idea is that we're always trying to get God's attention, according to the gospel writer, in order to see whether or not God understands what our needs are. And this is about needs. But it can also be taken, of course, in a whole, and the church used it, early church used it, in a whole metaphorical way to talk about sacrament, what was sacred. And of course, many people see in this the whole Eucharistic meal that we celebrate every week. The idea that there's a bounty, somehow, we don't know how it is, it miraculously appears on the altar. I actually made fresh bread for this morning. So, you know, how does it get there? Well, the truth is, Peter put it there. But who provided it all? Do you know people who just show up, like at your party, they have no idea all the work it took to do, don't ever stay for the cleanup, just come and go. Every time you invite them, you know, you just finish, you have them by for dinner, you just finish eating dinner and say, well, I have to go now. Well, gosh, I didn't even get to the dessert. I know, but I really have to be going. They're just so afraid they're going to have to clean up. That they get going right away, you know. So all the dessert, actually, whether you know or not, dessert is a host's way of trying to get people to do the dishes. To stay. You haven't caught on yet. Anybody who leaves before dessert, when your guests start to leave before dessert, you know it had nothing to do with what you baked. It had everything to do with, gotta get out of here now. So God doesn't do dessert. God just does bread and wine, even though it might be tasty bread. This morning it's tarragon hollow bread. It might be very tasty, but it's not particularly what God is interested in and what the church was interested in. The church wanted to structure a meal. They first started out with fish and wine, I told you, but then the fish got messy and the altar guild complained. And they said, we're not going to clean up all this fishy smell every week. What can we use? Bread's good. Okay, we'll use bread. And then everything changed. And it changed a lot because of this particular gospel. Because the whole thing got to be in the next part that happens in chapter 6, you have a loaves and fishes story. He goes and picks up all the loaves and fishes. So it used to be just loaves and fishes. And in some traditions it was fish and wine. So they took the best of two and eventually it became loaves and wine. But it took almost 400 years before that became the standard within the church. This morning we had a story about a wedding feast and how it's a metaphor for God's relationship with us. But it can also be seen as the beginning of the sacramental part of the church and what was happening in the early days in the church, especially in the Johannine church, the church that followed the writings of the Gospel of John. And we also have this whole idea that if you look at the second lesson, which is meant to complement the first and the third, that this is one of the gifts that God gives us so that we understand how it is that we're supposed to be close to God. God feeds us, God does miracles, God does things that seem miraculous, God does things that are everyday but to us seem miraculous. God does things that are miracles but every day seem to us as being regular things. We don't see the miracles, we don't see the signs. There's all these things that the writer is trying to put forth. And the church has used this for many, many, many years in order to explain the relationship of marriage and also how it is that marriage itself is supposed to be a relationship between us and God. And that's the kind of long and short of it and how and why it appears this morning. Now, if I were smart, I'd say amen and sit down and we go on to the next part of the service. But I think that there's some other little things to flesh out here, and I want to spend a couple minutes in doing this. I want to talk about the words that are in there, because my interest is words. You notice the new word, did you put the new word up on the sign this week? Much to her dismay. Is the new word? Clothing. Yes. Yes, clothing. Next week it's going to be blistering. And then, and let me tell you, this week has been very interesting in how people have responded to that sign. You didn't see it. Last week it was swaddling.
Just this one word?
Just one word, in quotation marks. I'm trying to engage the people driving by in a dialogue. George drove by and said to Joanne, well, it's not repeatable actually, but he said something along that line. What is going on there? What type of message is that?
He thought that Reggie and Oliver had made a mistake. He said they called a lot because the sign isn't right.
But it has caused people to stop in and talk.
Who has stopped it?
I've had some of the neighbors come by when I was here this week saying, saw your sign. Very interesting. And so it has engaged me at least 2 conversations this week. Not to mention 4,000 pieces of hate mail from the congregation. No, there are people who say, what are you trying to do? But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say that there are words that we use, or words that are part of our life here even, that how can we take them beyond our moment? How can we take them beyond this space and actually engage the community in some sort of dialogue? I want to have a dialogue with you, and Frank is allowing me to have a dialogue with the whole world now, because anybody can go on our website and see our services. And we've been talking about using YouTube maybe as a way to put it out there even further. I have to think about that a bit. But the words themselves are very, very interesting. If you look through this gospel and you pick out some things, there's some words here that are not used anywhere else in almost all, in a lot of the gospels. What did you notice anything strange about the language of the gospel, or any word, any one thing that comes out at you in the words here? One thing that Anthony said that he's very interested in, that I learned this by being on a radio talk show with Anthony. Every time I'm on a radio talk show and we speak, I learned things that I didn't know before, like when he said that. And one of the things he was talking about is he'd like to do some studies on numbers in the Bible and what they really mean. There's a lot of numbers in this. And those numbers are not chosen just to explain something. They mean something. Each one of those numbers has some very specific meaning to the people it was written to. There's about 10 or 12 numbers, or comparisons, 10 to 20, 3 days. 3 days is a very, very important number, as you know, in the gospel writings. So there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of numbers. What else did you notice about there?
First sign.
First sign. And what is a sign? What does it really mean?
Signal?
Maybe.
Signal to us.
A sign of what? This is the first sign, so the first sign that we did. Sign of what? What are we supposed, when you hear this, the first sign, what are you supposed to think? There's more to come. How many? It's like in the last week, I don't know, I believe before, I don't know if it was on Christmas. I didn't get into this, but I thought it was very interesting on Christmas that it says this is Mary's firstborn son. That's a clue to what? There are more to come. People miss that, firstborn. You don't say firstborn. You can say only. But it doesn't say that. It says firstborn. That's trying to tell you something. First sign, this is trying to tell you something. So what are we supposed to be looking for? We're supposed to be looking for more feasts, more meals. It's true that throughout the whole Old Testament and New Testament is replete with meals. There's a reason for that. It's not just because everybody got together and decided to run it down then. So there's more to come, and there's more meals, and it's supposed to mean something. What else did you notice? What other words were strange? Or different?
I thought it was interesting that he made wine in jugs that were used for ritual washing.
How would you like to have wine made out of people's bathwater? That's what it was there for. What were they washing away in the ritual washings? Blood. No, they weren't washing away sins. They're washing away blood, although they thought the blood was sinful for a variety of reasons. But this is for the ritual washings that women went through. Men didn't have to go through ritual washings. That women went through at the time of birth or in their menstrual period. That's what that ritual washing was for. It was for the mikvah, the bath that the women had to go through before they could be in touch with other people. Or men would wash their hands or their bodies if they had come in touch with a dead person or somebody or a woman who had blood or whatever. But they knew that the blood carried disease. They didn't know exactly why, and it was all women's fault. They were sure of that. I'm not being facetious. They blamed it all on, that's how we get to the original sin part. It was Eve's fault, because she was a woman. She tempted Adam, and then from then on, it says in the Genesis part that she was, it actually uses the word basically condemned to have children and suffer for the rest of her life. And all women will suffer in that same way because of this particular thing that happened, disobeying God. Man, the male gets his own problems, but the female in the story is the reason that Jews went through the whole ritual washing was to atone for that moment. It got to be more symbolic than actual. In fact, Jesus calls the Pharisees on and said, "You're really great. You go and you wash your hands about all these things, and you carry on all this compulsive washing, but then you don't follow through on the other things that are important." He said, time to stop washing, time to start putting your priorities in order. Because the Pharisee, when he goes to his house, criticizes Jesus for not going through the ritual washing. But the interesting thing in the story is the host who was there never even offered him the pan to do so. It was his job, it was the host's job to do it. So he's criticizing, and Jesus had already even sat down and was ready to eat when the host was about to serve him food. It's 2 hours into the story, and he said, "How dare you lay down at my table? You haven't washed your hands." She's like, "Well, did you offer me anything? How long was I going to have to wait?"
This time in Palestine, did the women have to go off into a separate tent or place during their
menstrual period? Yes, they were. During this time, women were put out of the house for the whole time of the menstrual period, for a week to 10 days, whatever.
Well, they also did a lot of foot washing.
Did a lot of foot washing, right?
And then Jesus washed the feet of the...
Right, but the foot washing, again, was just an act of hospitality. It was not ritualistic. It's not like the hand washing.
Even when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples.
Right, he then made it into something ritualistic, but up to that point it wasn't. It was just a matter of hospitality. It's sort of like when I used to go visit Pete and Shirley at the beach, they always had this little pan outside the door. Before you came in the house, please dip your feet in the water before you drag all the sand inside the house. Yeah, that's true. This shows you that no matter our best intentions. So yes, women were put out at that time. And in the Orthodox tradition in Brooklyn, for instance, it still lives the same way. There's a special tent of meeting, they call it, where women go during that period. Men are not supposed to have anything to do with it during that time. You can actually be expelled from the community. In fact, according to Leviticus, if you have sex with a woman during the time of a menstrual period, you are guilty of a sin that is punishable by stoning to death. And a woman too, for letting you do it.
But that was also, a health.
It was a health issue, right? They knew that, as I said, they knew blood was somehow involved. But you'll notice in Leviticus and throughout all the New Testament that none of the blood issues have anything to do with men. It's all women's fault. And, yeah. Thanks to men, yes. Well, but it'd still be women's fault for being there. That's right. It's true. So, some people, when I talk about this in Judaism, get very, very upset, but it is true. I mean, it's one of the things that has been handed down to us, and we're still part of that. And what happened was the Puritans got a hold of some of this, didn't read the whole thing, just knew certain parts of it, because the church was only allowing you to read certain parts. And that's how we come to some of our most ridiculous laws and customs that we still hold today. And even in healthcare, trying to break through those old wives' tales, as they call them, is really very difficult. What other word did you notice? Was there anything else that you noticed here that's unusual? The reason I say that is that we've been having a lot of discussion this week about words that heal and words that hurt. This gospel is full of both of them. Words that both heal and words that are hurtful. What do you see? Yeah.
Well, the word glory, first person's glory, I just thought to myself, well, what does that mean?
Right. What is Jesus' glory? What does it mean? What does the word itself mean? Glory. And see, that should be one we put out there, because people don't even know what that means. If you ask people, I remember going through the exams when I was going to be ordained. I had to wait till a weekend, and the first question, they set you up with all these people who interview, and this woman who's Carol Anderson, who's the rector of your daughter's parish in California, she was head of the committee at that time. And I worked for her. She was my boss, and she happened to be the one of the examiners. And the first thing she said was, "So, Mr. Hesse," I was ready for almost any question. She said, "Defend your faith." Well, what does that mean? Oh, people start writing down. All of a sudden, so the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "I believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit." People said, "Oh, road answer. Yeah." And then it got into discussion of words like, how do you understand the word glory? What's really interesting about that whole experience is, here you are, you have not been to seminary yet, you are going through the process in order to go to seminary, but they want you to speak the language already. I don't think I've ever used the word glory at breakfast. Or at dinner. Unless it was glory be, they brought in wine again. Whatever. But we don't use those words very often. But we're supposed to know what they mean. What does glory mean, Linda Finnegan? Excuse me. These whole names.
Something wonderful, I think. I'm not sure, really. I mean, I think of glorious, which...
When they talk about the glory of God, was that something wonderful? That was something absolutely terrifying. You know that? The glory of God. If you talk about the fact that the glory, when they talk about it in the Gospels, that the glory of God appeared, people were terrified of that concept. You never want to meet the glory of God. You'll die. Seriously.
I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
Well, I'm letting you know now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
If you were on the glory road, as it's in hymns and spirituals and so forth, you would be on the way to heaven, possibly. That's my...
You hoped.
Yeah.
To be on the glory road was to be on a road to some sort of understanding of the nature of God, but not necessarily on the way to heaven.
Power worthy of praise?
I have no idea what that means.
Well, power that is benevolent, that has a good purpose at the end,
So,
that people would respect and love.
Power.
Good power.
Sort of Glinda the Good Witch sort of thing. Wizard of Oz, that type of.
Right.
Would you call her a glorious being? Yeah, she that was part of the whole idea. She was, Billy Burke of all people. Here she was, the A lot of people don't even know who Billy Burke is, I know, so that's all right. Did you know who Billy Burke is?
Yeah, she lived in Hastings, right?
She did, yeah. And
The mansion was up there.
who was she married to?
Ziegfeld, right?
Yeah, Flo Ziegfeld. You didn't know that, did you? Yeah, very good, yeah. So, she was a great comedian also, but she had that voice, but sort of Christian with this channeling, all that is, you know, in Wicked, yes, thank you. So, and in the Apple Tree, she's doing the Apple Tree right now, probably one of the worst plays was ever written. I don't know why they could on me, but anyway. So, you have this idea of something that is benevolently good as being glory, and it doesn't mean that at all. What is glory? What's the word itself?
The Hebrew word that you're using here, kobod, K-O-B-O-D,
Or K-O-B-D.
kobod. What it meant was the presence of God in the sense of the pillar of cloud by night, by day, and the pillar of fire by night. The presence of God is an awesome, frightening thing. You're quite right to interpret it as scary.
Right, it's a theophany, it's called a theophany.
That's the word.
The presence of God in another form. Like an epiphany is the presence of an idea finally coming around to you. You know, I should have had an E8, that's an epiphany. But don't ask me why all these slogans are on my head this morning. I think because Anthony and I went to the movies and we saw, you know what they're reviving? They're giving ads again for the woman who did all those jingles in Ohio. Something of Ohio. Defiance, Ohio. Yeah. Do you all know that Irene was a great jingle writer in her early days? Did you know that? Her most famous, I think her most famous, for which she won a car, if I remember correctly, was filter, flavor, flip, top box.
Wow. Wow.
Am I right? You won a car for that? And she got in trouble because they came to her school, where she was, in Brooklyn, Maryland, and they wanted to photograph her in the car, of course, but smoking a cigarette, of course. Great example to all those students whose teachers are trying to keep them from smoking in 1955. Was it 55, is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
The Alzheimer's has not quite sunk in yet, so remember parts of it. But all the jingles are in my head now, I think because of this whole thing. Anyway, I digress. But it is about words and about what glory means. I think glory is not a helpful word. In fact, I think it's a hurtful word. And I think that it's a hurtful word because it's meant to be a word of power, but it's meant to be a word of terrifying power. It's to scare the living daylights out of you. So when we talk about God's glory, you notice that we don't pray for that. We don't ever want to see it. We don't ever want to know it. We want to think that God has it, but we don't want to see it.
So don't you think it's a weird time to be mentioning it in this?
It is. Yes. And see, this is why this gospel is called the science gospel or the hidden gospel in some cases. It has meaning in it. And these words, we just throw them around like we know what they mean. But we have no idea what we're really asking for and what this is really saying. I'm going to end what we're doing this morning now, just having opened that door, because I want us to try to start to look at the words that we use in church, and that we use, or that even used in these Gospels, and say to ourselves, what does it mean? Should we be using them? And why do we not know what they mean when we've been coming to church this long? And that we should not take the words for granted, because there are certain words that people hear that may not be offensive to you, or may not be offensive to you, but are offensive to someone else. There's certain words that people use all the time, don't even realize the import of those words, or the impact that they have. I spend at least 3 hours a week in putting together the bulletin, minimum, with the liturgy book, and taking out the language that is in there and trying to put it into something that is more uplifting. If you go back, if you want to do an exercise, go back and take any of the 3 lessons that you see this morning look them up in the message. You can find it online and see what changes I made. And you'll see what the challenge is. I do that every week. I wish I could do it in the hymns. Eventually we'll get to that. We're working on it. I wish I could do it enough. And I also give them, every week, just about, I've changed this liturgy in little ways to try, because now, after doing it a while, I begin to see things, that's not helpful to say it that way. I missed that. Anthony pointed one out to me weeks ago, which we've been doing this liturgy for 3 years or 4 years, and I was referring to Christ as He. But we spent a long time trying to take out any reference to Christ as He, because in Christ there is no male nor female, no East or West, no Greek nor Jew. That's the basis of the whole liturgy we're doing. But I had to call it that after all that time. Now you say, okay, that's a minor thing, but it's trying to be consistent in the message that we're presenting. And the message that we're trying to present is the whole idea that we are trying to present a message that is uplifting, and one that is trying its best to mediate or work our way through language that is not hurtful to people, but actually lifts them up. I told Mimi, one of the things is, we were talking about relationships. I think that we should not be involved in personal relationships that do not lift us up. And I think that we should be people who seek to lift other people up all the time. That is what I think makes us a church community. That we want to lift others up by what we say, by what we do, by how we act, and by the words we use. One word, just one word, can ruin somebody's whole week. I had it happen to me this week. Distasteful.
Wow, it's a tough word.
Taxes always do it. Taxes are distasteful. So, you use these in a sentence. Put all the words together. So, someone thought that some of my work was distasteful. And that was very hard, to speak about. So I would say that I want us to be aware of these things. I want us to be aware of how it is that we, and the language we use. And I'm trying really, really hard. I hope that the liturgy we use, which is the work of the people, that it lifts up. Sort of like here's another one of those old slogans. What was that? The Playtex bra, wasn't it? It lifts up. Yes, that wasn't yours. Well, the whole idea about that was, that it did lift up, but it was also, if you read the story, there's a very interesting story that Jane Russell tells about the whole thing in her relationship with Howard Hughes and this whole thing. And one of the things he was trying to do, because he invented that bra. Did you know that? He invented that, yeah, especially for her. And he was trying to do two things. He was trying to build her career, which he did. He was also trying to invent something that would actually help women who were large. And he saw it. He had this whole philosophy that he had written about it, and that she was supposed to somehow try to talk about it when she was doing all the publicity. And one of the things that he always told me, he said, and make sure you're always standing up very straight, because we need to show how it is that this will lift up the entire community, transform. And it did. It added millions to his already billions in doing that. And but there was a philosophy behind it. He wasn't just trying to create a better bra. He was trying to create a better form, a whole better presentation.
What's the movie Outlaw?
Yes. Yeah. The classic B movie.
Banned in St. Paul, Minnesota.
I'm sorry?
Banned.
It was?
Strong Catholic community.
Huh. I'm not surprised. Probably still is there and there, actually, no, in that community, yeah.
Someone called our work at the shelter last week dysfunctional. And it was devastating.
But I don't think we should withdraw from people that can bring us down, because then if we're not engaging them, then we're not allowing
I
for
agree.
growth.
I think that we should not be drawn in by people whose attempt is to bring us to their level.
But maybe it's in that is our opportunity.
Right, it can be, but I think that we should be about lifting them up. However, there are some people who refuse to be lifted up. Refuse. And I say that there's plenty of other work to do for people who want to be lifted up. And that one of the things that we can do as a community is to always be seeking to lift people up, no matter, in whatever we do. Doesn't mean we ignore anybody or leave people who we think are too much of a challenge. But we cannot go to their level in order to lift them up.
Right.
That's a mistake we often make.
I think there's also the argument, and since you had shared that story with me earlier, that, I didn't agree with this group of distasteful, but there's also the argument that sometimes you need other people to tell you something you don't want to hear. So I don't know what the context was with yours, Anthony, but it might be, well, maybe there is an aspect of the program that is dysfunctional. And I'm just throwing that out as an example. I have been told many times, especially by family members, about things that I do that they think are wrong. And it does make me think, and similarly from clients, it makes me think, well, if I'm hearing this from a number of people, then it must be right.
Well, there's ways to say that. There's ways to say that. They can say, Rob, really, you and I need to talk because I really am hurt by some of the things you said. That's another thing to say, everything you do is tasteless, for example. So I think that one of the things that I'm hoping for is that we find a way also. Because I think that part of the whole journey, the road to glory, if you will, is finding the way that lifts people up as we're going towards that, whatever our goal is. And I'm really hoping that one of the things, if we want to understand what our identity is as a church, one of the things I think we should always be about is, ask ourselves the question, is what we are doing something that lifts other people up? And I want to spend my life doing that. I think that's a good thing to do. I want, when I go, whether it's next week or the week after, for people to say, one of the things he really did was he lifted people up.
Will you be wearing a bra?
You'll have to work that out. I'll be gone, so I won't care. That's what I say to my mother. She says, make sure that this happens. I said, you'll be gone. You won't care. I'll know. I'll know. There's a threat implied. All right. Well, as we go through the rest of the service today, let's look at the words that are there. If you have some questions about what they mean, I hope you'll ask. We spent a lot of time. We spent 3 years. I don't know if everybody knows this, but for the people who are newer to the community, this service isn't something that I wrote. We spent 3 years as a congregation putting this together with surveys every couple of weeks, with meetings, with London classes where we discussed every word. We took the part of the Nicene Creed word for word, rewrote it, and then got rid of it. It took 1.5 years to do that. Trying to have it make sense. And then all of a sudden say, well, maybe creeds aren't helpful. So right now, we're using this creed, which we're about to say, which is one that I just picked up out of the Bible, because I thought, gee, if a bishop wants to object to anything, he can't object to Scripture. Because I had to sign something that said, I believe that Scripture contains everything necessary for salvation, whatever that means. So, since the Nicene Creed is not scriptural, I thought, okay, well, at least we can say this. This is Scripture. He can't argue with that.
What was his thought? Did we do that when he was here?
No, we didn't, because he wanted to do the service the way he wanted to do it, and that's his prerogative because he's the celebrant. I'm not going to be here next week. Mimi's going to do the service, so she can do it the way she wants to. And Eric, yes, they're going to be doing it. So, whoever's the celebrant, as my mom says, whoever deals wins. If you're in charge, then you do it the way that you do it. So, this is my way for right now, but I'm open to other ways, provided that you tell me nicely.